Hi there, this is DM Nell, and I am back to you with another edition of my SOTDL Talk vlog, whatever you call it. Here I am today going to cover a topic that I hadn't intended to. Intended to go into the combat, how to play the game, show how this whole Shadow of the Demon Lord thing works on the tabletop. But I thought that it would probably be better to go through the process of creating a character first to show you how that's done before we actually go into combat. Now, I know this is done in other videos, and I know that this is covered extensively, at least in one other video that I've seen, but I think I want to go ahead and do just kind of a walkthrough for one type of character, one character, and that will give you an idea of how you create a character so that when you actually go into the book and you start looking at your options, you'll have some kind of an idea on how to do that. Now, what I'm using is Roll20, which is a virtual tabletop. It's how I run most of my games. And there is a character sheet that is built into Roll20, which is an excellent resource for the virtual tabletop, for this virtual tabletop. The person who created the character sheet, I do not know their name right off the top of my head. I know that they are on the G Plus community for Shadow of the Demon Lord. And so shout out to them. They did an excellent job of putting the character sheet together. And actually, I think it has several authors. It's not just one person, but the latest update really made this a usable and a really fantastic character sheet for anyone to use. So let me go ahead and get this character sheet up here ready to go. So now, what you see on the right-hand side of the screen is the character sheet in Roll20. And it's modeled after the character sheet that it was created for the game. I believe there's a couple of different options out there now, but the first one that was created is kind of this pentagram shape with the various circles where you put your attributes. And so that is what this character sheet is modeled off of. And I love this character sheet because it really stands apart from other types of character sheets. All right, so I am in the core rulebook under the character creation section, and I have the ancestries dialed up here. And we're going to go ahead and start off with choosing an ancestry. And for this example, I'm going to choose a dwarf. The dwarf that I'm going to choose is going to be named Brom Ironstone, which is a type. It's a character that I've created before for D&D, and I wanted a version to use as an NPC for Shadow of the Demon Lord. So that's what we're doing today. In the ancestry box, I'm going to put dwarf. So what is a dwarf? A dwarf is an elderly race cursed by the gods for their vanity and doomed to toil and dig in the earth for the treasures they covet. Dwarves make powerful warriors and priests. So that's kind of what they excel at. However, you can make a dwarf anything you want to. So I'm probably going to go with warrior because that's what my Brom Ironstone is typically has typically been in my other iterations of them. So going into the ancestry section of the rulebook, we have different things that go into the creation of your character. And I'm not going to read all of this because it's a lot of information, but just to touch off some of the stuff, you have the ancestry story. You also have languages of the Northern Reach, which it's assuming obviously that you're going to start your campaign in the Northern Reach, which may not be the case. But if you are, then this would be a good resource for you. Obviously, my character is going to know Dwarvish, but we'll get to that here as soon as we get into the dwarf section of this chapter. Ancestry traits, it goes through what the various traits are, which I will actually discuss as we populate them. And then languages and professions, talents, which are some of the attributes and abilities that your character derives from not only their ancestry but their path as well. So we have uh, the ancestry starting off with human, which I'm not going to do. And you can see that there's a lot to the creation process, but it goes pretty quickly. It goes from human to changeling, and then we go to clockwork, and then to dwarf. And dwarf is where I'm going to stop here. So a dwarf, dwarves live under mountains in elaborate subterranean cities. From them, they launch expeditions deep into the earth to pry gold and silver from the unyielding rock. They hoard treasures in great vaults and view other people with distrust, suspecting them all of coveting their wealth. The dwarves have few friends and gain little aid when the forces of darkness overrun their strongholds to lay claim to their vaults. Thus, many dwarfs wander the lands homeless, friendless, searching for a new place to call their own. So it's assuming that you're one of those dwarves. So some of the things that dwarves are known for: the beard's the thing. Dwarves have thick, stout bodies, limbs corded with muscle, and bellies bulging from their fondness for alcohol and food. All dwarfs, male and female, wear elaborate facial hair, braiding it in their clan designs, decorating it with silver or gold rings, or greasing it up into unusual shapes. Other dwarfs have fanciful mustaches or thick mutton chops that hang past their waist. So if you can envision, uh, I don't know if some of you have played Warhammer or Warhammer Fantasy, but the miniature line for the dwarves is a perfect example of what this is describing. If you look at the miniatures for Warhammer Dwarves, and you can go onto the Games Workshop website and just take a look, or you can just Google images for Warhammer Dwarfs, then you will see exactly what this is talking about. Um, mohawks, just awesome dwarf beards, just braided in all kinds of ways with all kinds of different adornments on them. So it's very easy to visualize this once you have been exposed to that miniatures line. All right, the next attribute, short but dense. Dwarves stand between 3 and 4 feet tall, and they can weigh up to 250 pounds, so pretty stout, but muscular. They have the human range of coloration, though they tend to be grimy and wrinkly from their work in the mines and forges. The next section, or the next part, is dour and suspicious. Gruff and critical and suspicious, dwarfs make few friends outside of their own kind. They covet treasure, but temper their greed with the certainty that their ancestors are always watching. Thus, dwarves conduct themselves with honor to avoid bringing shame to their clans. And then finally, common names just give you some of the different types of dwarf names that you could choose from or create different versions of. All right, now this is the part that gets into actually creating a dwarf for the game. It gives you your starting attributes. Now, what I'm doing is going by the core rulebook character creation process, but there are supplements that have been released called the Victims of the Demon Lord, which give you alternate character creation options for all of these ancestries and some of the ancestries that are in other supplements. That expands your options, but I'm not going to use that for this example. I'm just going to use what is in the core rulebook. So the starting attributes for a dwarf is you start off with a strength of 10, and looking over here in my character sheet, I already have a strength of 10, so we're good to go there, nothing to change. An agility of 9, so we have to modify the agility down to 9. Intellect of 10, we already have that, so we're good to go there. And then will of 10. So those are your 4 main attributes. Strength, which encompasses not only physical strength, but your durability. So in other games like D&D, that would be your endurance or your constitution. It's all wrapped up into the strength attribute in this game. And then you have agility. Agility is basically your dexterity, how nimble you are, how well you are at avoiding getting hurt, how athletic you are, that sort of thing. And it also helps to determine your defense score, which we'll get into here shortly. Your intellect, and that is how smart you are. It also helps to determine how well you perceive your surroundings. And then you have your willpower, which is called wisdom in other games like D&D, but your willpower is your sense of personality, your internal fortitude, and your ability to shake off things that would otherwise tax your sanity. All right, so those are your starting attributes. And these will be modified as we get into the game, but that is, as a dwarf, that's what you start off with, and that's what every dwarf starts off with. Now, part of the game is that at some point during your character's lifetime, you can opt to reduce one score by 1 point to buff up another score by that 1 point. And I'm going to choose to do that here now. I am going to reduce my intellect to 9, and I'm going to bump up my strength score to 11. Because I want my dwarf to be stronger than your average dwarf, but maybe a little dumber than your average dwarf. All right, so that is our starting attribute scores. Perception. Your perception score equals your intellect score plus 1. So you'll see over here the intellect score, and you got a little bubble right next to it, which is your perception, which automatically defaults to what your intellect score starts off at, which was basically was 10 on this character sheet. But since my intellect score is now 9, I have to reduce that to 9. Because it should equal your intellect score. However, because a dwarf is a little bit more perceptive than your average Joe, I get plus 1. So I get to bump this back up to 10. Now, these other little bubbles that you see here are the modifiers that go along with your ability score. Similar to D&D, your ability score gives you a modifier that is used in different parts of the game. The modifier is based off of the score minus 10. So as you can see, my strength score is 11. So 11 minus 10 is 1. So my modifier is plus 1. And as you can see, my intellect is 9. So 10 minus 9 is negative 1. So my modifier for my intellect is negative 1. All right, so that is perception. We go into defense now, and your defense equals your agility score. So as you can see, my agility score was 10. I reduced it to 9 because that's what a dwarf starts off at. And so I have to change my defense score now on my character sheet, which defaulted to 10. But I have to change it now to 9 because that's what my agility score is, and that's what my defense should equal for a dwarf. Your health equals your strength score plus 4. So my strength score is 11. My health score defaulted to 10 on the character sheet. I'm going to change it to 11. And I get to add 4 more to that because dwarves are more durable than your average character. So I get to add plus 4 to this 11. So that puts it up to 15. And your healing rate is a sub-attribute of your health. So your healing rate equals 1/4 of your health rounded down. So I've got a 15 here. 1/4 of my health is 3 because you divide 15 by 4, and that gives you a 3 rounded down. So that is what your healing rate starts at. Now, your healing rate is what you would is the number that you would use to heal damage that you get during the game, either through healing spells or potions or similar things like that. All right, size. Now your size up here on your character sheet is defaults to 1, but my size as a dwarf is 1/2. So I'm going to change this from 1 to 1/2. And the sizes range anywhere from, I think, all the way down to 1/8, all the way up to 10 or higher. A character that is a size 1 is your average human size character. So 5.5, 6 feet tall. That's a size 1 creature. So I'm size 1/2, and as it's set up here, dwarves are 3 to 4 feet tall. So you're quite a bit shorter than the average humanoid, which makes you a size 1/2 creature. Even though you're big and wide, you're still small. All right, so that is size. Now your speed is 8 as a dwarf, so I'm going to change my default of 10 down to 8. Your speed is in yards, so this game measures your distance and speed in terms of yards. So I can move in a combat round, I can move 8 yards as part of my movement. Up to 8 yards, I should say. I believe a human can move like 10 yards, but 8 is pretty slow because you're size 1/2 and you got the stumpy little legs that and the big girth that you have to carry. So you're lumbering along, not quite as quickly as your humanoid companions would be. All right, and power. You start off your power is 0. Power is an attribute that is used to measure your magical ability and strength. And so you're as a dwarf, we're just starting off at 0 because we don't have any natural magical uh, power to draw from. All right, so damage. Damage starts off at 0. We're assuming you're starting the game without any injuries, so you start your damage at 0. Now, let me just touch real briefly on the difference between damage and health. Your health score, it only changes when you gain a level, and the rules tell you to increase your health score because you gained a level, or when you are hit by a certain type of attack or a certain type of condition that would reduce your health score. Now, your health score is not something that should be changed. It's not like hit points where you mark off hit points as you take damage. That's why you have this damage attribute up here. Your health score is it is similar to your maximum hit points in Dungeons and Dragons. That determines how much at your maximum level of health or wellness. That is how healthy you are. You have my character starting off with a 15 health, so that is as healthy as I will ever get until I either gain a path, a level in a path, or another level in dwarf. So if you do take damage during the game, what you do is you start off at 0 in damage and you mark it up based on how much damage you take. So if I get hit by a creature that does 4 points of damage to me, I would mark my damage up to 4. When your damage equals your health score, that's when things are bad and you fall down and you start to die basically. It's equal to getting down to 0 hit points in Dungeons and Dragons. And so the it's a very important distinction because a lot of the mechanics in this game go based off of this health and damage relationship. All right, so and as you can see, this character sheet tells you what your max damage can be right down here, even though your health score is right down here. All right, so bringing my damage back down to 0. Insanity. Insanity is over here. It's a sub-attribute of will, and we're starting off with a 0. Although I would argue the dwarves should start off with a 1 because they're crazy little fuckers. But relatively speaking, amongst other dwarves, they're not insane. So we start off with a 0 insanity, and I will talk about insanity more in another video. But this is an attribute that can increase depending on the types of things that you encounter. Really scary monsters, really scary situations can cause you to lose your marbles a little bit, and you start gaining insanity, which can lead to bad things in the game mechanically. And then the last other attribute here is corruption, and corruption is another sub-attribute. It's not really linked to any of the other attributes. It's kind of standing out here by itself. And corruption is something that illustrates how pure your soul is. If you're a character that has a soul, and not all characters in this game have a soul, then corruption determines whether or not when you die, your soul goes to the afterlife or it goes to hell. And the afterlife is the underworld. The underworld is the place where souls go to be cleansed before they get reincarnated back into a new body and a new life. But if a soul is corrupted and it has corruption points, then it goes to hell, where a bunch of devils feast upon that corruption until that spirit is cleansed, and then that soul goes up to the underworld to undergo the process of being prepared for the next mortal life that they would enter. I'll talk more about that some other time. It's a big, long story for this campaign world. All right, so 0 corruption for the dwarves, and again, I would kind of argue that they should probably start with 1. But anyway, all right, some of the other things that dwarves start with: dark sight. You can see in areas obscured in shadows or darkness within medium range as if those areas were lit. Beyond this distance, you treat darkness as shadows and shadows as lit. So that is an attribute that I am going to put down here. Just initially, I'm going to put it down here in the notes, mods, and quirks, etc. Although there is a section on this character sheet under the equipment and talents that you can put that. But just to make things a little bit more streamlined for this video, I'm just going to jot it down here. So dark sight is one of my starting attributes. Hated creature. Choose a creature from the hated table. Your hatred grants 1 boon on attack rolls made against that creature or the creatures that you hate. So I'm going to put down here hated creature. And then I'm going to roll on the hated table as soon as we get to that to see what I would get a boon on attack rolls towards. Boons and banes, I think I mentioned on an earlier video, but I will go more into when we get into the combat video. All right, and then lastly, the last part of creating a dwarf is robust constitution. And that says you take half damage from poison. You make challenge rolls with 1 boon to avoid or remove the poisoned affliction. So, as being a dwarf, your constitution is strong, you drink a lot, so you are somewhat resistant to the effects of poison. All right, so that is your initial creating of a dwarf. I can pretty much start playing as a dwarf right now if I wanted to. But I have a little bit more to go on. So that is the initial level 0 dwarf, and you can see I'm still level 0. At some point, I will level up to an expert dwarf. But that only happens when you hit 4th level, and I will get to that some other time, not today. So let's move on. And now you have several tables that give you a variety of different other aspects of your character that you can roll randomly, or you can just, if your GM wants you just to choose them, you can just choose them. I'm going to roll them randomly, and I'm going to see what I get on each of these. So for my dwarf age, which is the first table, it says to roll 3d6. So I'm going to roll 3d6 just here with normal dice, because I don't have my dice roller up on the screen to view. All right, so I get a 6, a 3, and a 6. So that is, let's see, 12, 15. And on my table, I see that I am middle-aged. I'm a middle-aged adult between 51 to 100 years old. So I'm going to put that up here. Middle-aged, 51 to 100 years old. And I can just pick the range that I want at that point. All right, dwarf build. And again, I will roll 3d6 to see just what kind of build my dwarf has. So we start off with a 3, a 6, so that's 9, and then another 3, that is 12. And so with a 12, you are average in height and build. So put down average, height, and build. All right, so the next section is the dwarf appearance. Roll 3d6 for that as well. So I have a 3, a 3, and a 1. That is 7. And I get, you look like a typical dwarf, being hairy, portly, and grubby. That's kind of boring, but we'll go with it. I'm just going to copy and paste this one this time. And the next section is the dwarf hatred that we talked about before. Now this time I get to roll a d20 to determine what type of creatures I hate. Let's see if it's something interesting. All right, 3 to 4, troglodytes. So I hate troglodytes, and I will put that down here under this section again. Under hated creature, I'm just going to put colon troglodytes. So hopefully, at some point in my dwarf's adventuring career, I will encounter some troglodytes so I can take out my hatred against them. All right, dwarf background. And this is where we start building some history for our dwarf. Again, depending on your DM might just have you create one on your own if you have a good idea. But if you're just kind of drawing a blank or you're trying to create a character quickly, then you can draw your background from this table. So I will do that, and I will roll a 2. And your ancestors appeared to you in a vision and sent you to recover a fabled relic. So that right there, my friends, is a good role-playing opportunity and adventure idea that you can feed to your GM. And I'm just going to put that down right there. Now, again, backgrounds, there is a background tab here on the character sheet. I can put that in, but for now, I'm just going to put everything on this front page. So for my background, put it there. Now, again, this is something that your GM can build, can customize an adventure just for you, or can add this as part of an existing adventure as kind of just a side quest just for you. And that will tie it into your background, and your character is automatically now a solid part of the game that the GM is running, which is always fun. All right, and the last thing here is your personality. If assuming you don't want to come up with your own personality and you just want a random one, let's see what we come up with. So 3d6, that is a 2, a 4, so that's 6, and then another 2, and that is 8. So as an 8, you believe other people covet your wealth. It is your duty to protect what is yours at any cost. So basically, you're paranoid that everybody wants your money and your stuff, and you're going to do whatever it takes to protect that. All right, so that is personality. Personality goes a long way. All right, so let's see what else we got in this section. That was it for creating dwarf, and now it goes into goblins. But that is not it for the ancestry section. If we get past all of the ancestries, then we can come up with professions. What professions does your character have? And every character starts off with 2 professions. As it states right here, you begin with 2 professions. You can choose any profession you'd like, or you can let the dice decide. So I'm going to let the dice decide. And just before we do that, you can see here that languages, you can trade out a profession to learn and to speak another language, or gain the ability to read a language you already know how to speak. Now, I thought that your character creation told you what languages you start off knowing, and oh, it does. I totally skipped over that, and the profession section. So, getting back to that, languages and professions. You speak Common. So let's get back up here. Common. And you speak, read, and write Dwarvish. Speak. All right, so we need to specify. We speak Common. We speak, read, and write Dwarfish. All right, so that is what you automatically start off with as being a dwarf. So coming back to the profession section, you can trade out a profession to learn to speak another language, or to gain the ability to read a language you already know how to speak. So if I wanted to, I could say, well, I already know how to speak Common. I think I want to be able to read Common, so I can trade out one of the 2 beginning professions that I get, in addition to what I would normally get as a profession if I were to get one. But as you can see back here, I didn't get a profession, I just got languages. See, you speak the common tongue and you speak, yeah, nothing about professions under the dwarf. So some other ancestries might have that, but sadly, dwarf is not one of them. All right, so we do begin the game with 2 professions. If I want to, I can trade out one for an additional language that I don't already know, and I can learn to speak it, or I can learn to read a language that I already know how to speak, but I don't know how to read. I'm going to forego that. I'm good with just knowing Common and Dwarfish, and I am going to get 2 professions instead. So I'm going to roll them off this table. And the first table here is profession types. The profession types are academic, common, criminal, martial, religious, and wilderness. So I'll roll randomly to see which one I get. So the D6 number I came up with is 5, and I start off with the religious profession. And you belong to a religious institution, roll a d20 and consult the religious professions table to determine your profession. All right, so that is the first one. So right now I'm just going to put religious up here on the character sheet, and we will roll on that subtable here as soon as I figure out what my second profession is. So my second profession is also a 5. I'm going to re-roll that because I don't want to be doubly religious. And the second one is a 3. So the 3 is criminal. You engage in illegal or illicit activities. Roll d20 and consult the criminal professions table to determine your profession. All right, so I have a religious and I have a criminal profession. So let's go to the next page and roll on those tables. So the criminal professions, you need to roll d20 to determine what those are and what that is. And I came up with a 13 on mine, which means I was a pickpocket. So at some point in my career, I got to so low that I had to resort to pickpocketing. All right, and then for the religious table, I believe that's on the next page here. Well, D20, and I get a 4. And I'm now an evangelist. You travel from place to place preaching your faith to any who will listen and rely on the charity of believers. You can read and write one language that you know. All right, so I'm going to copy this. I'm going to put this down here for now. Evangelist. I would put it up here under description, except I'm going to run out of space. Well, you know what? Actually, I can put it up here. I'm going to put it under my religious because that is what I am. All right, I'm just going to separate these two. All right, there we go. So, yeah, and it says that I can read and write one language that you know. So I already know how to read and write Dwarfish, so I'm going to add read and write to common. So there you go. Now I am very literate in both common and in dwarfish. So that kind of already gives me ideas that maybe I don't want to start down the warrior path. Maybe I want to be something that involves reading and writing and stuff like that, which suggests maybe a priestly path or perhaps an arcane path. Ideas, ideas, ideas. Okay, so anyway, the next part of character creation is well, let's see here. What is this? Altering profession. Since a profession can be anything that involves a lifestyle or occupation, you can substitute for other professions for the ones listed here. Rather than become a comedian, for example, you could be a clown or a mime. You can substitute chimney sweep for a laborer or pastry chef for a cook. Before making a substitution, talk to your GM to make sure it is appropriate for the game. So, maybe I don't want to be a pickpocket. Maybe I'd rather be a beggar. Although I think a beggar is probably already on the criminal table. Yeah, it's already on there. So, anyway, you can talk to if you have an idea and you don't like what you roll, just talk to your GM and see what they can do to help you come up with the concept that you have in your head. Or just go with what you rolled. I'm just going with what I rolled. All right, starting equipment. Starting equipment is something that's necessary because you don't want to go out into the world without any clothes on or any weapons. So to start you start with equipment based on your character's wealth, and so you have to determine your wealth by rolling on the wealth table. Again, that's a 3d6. You want to roll high because the higher you roll, the more wealthy you are. You have destitute, poor, getting by, comfortable, wealthy, and rich. So of these 6, which am I going to be? Let the dice determine this. And we have a 6, a 4, that's a 10. So far, so good. 10. And another 6, so that's 16. I am comfortable because 14 to 16 is comfortable. You live well and make enough that you can save a little. That's awesome. So I go down here to the comfortable section. It gives me a little bit more detail. So it tells me that I have a dagger, a staff, a club, or a sling with 20 stones. So I think I'm going to pick a club because I really don't see a dwarf in my head. I don't see a dwarf using a dagger as a primary weapon. I don't see a dwarf using a staff necessarily, unless they're a shepherd. And a sling with 20 stones. Dwarves are kind of get in your face type of people. They're not really hit you from the distance unless they really don't have any other options. So at this point, I'm going to go with club. All right, I have fine clothing, backpack, backpack, a cloak, a week of rations. So let's see, I'm going to do rations 1 week. A water skin, a tinder box, so I can light fires. 1d3 torches. So I'll just roll a d6 right now, and I rolled a 5, so I have 3 torches. And a pouch containing 1d6 copper pieces. So let's just roll that right off the bat here. Oh, sadness. I only have 1 copper piece. So pouch with 1 copper piece. Or copper penny, I think is what it's referred to in this game. All right, so that is my character's wealth. I now have stuff. I have a club. I have nice clothes. I got a backpack. I got a cloak. I got a week's worth of rations that I can survive on out in the wilderness. I have a water skin. I can make campfires or I can light torches with my tinderbox, and I have 1 copper penny that I can buy something with. Not much. I must have blown all my money on the fine clothes. All right, so it's better to look good than to feel good. That's what that dude from Saturday Night Live used to say, right? All right, so the last thing here I think is the interesting things table, and the interesting things is just another aspect of your character that can add to the role-playing experience or to their background. How much you want to expand on this is between you and your GM. It could just be an oddity that you found and you just keep for the heck of it, or it can be something that can have a meaningful um, uh, aspect to one of the adventures in your career. So let's see here. I will roll first a d6 to determine which table to roll on for the interesting thing, and I roll a 1. So the first table is what I will be rolling my d20 from to determine what my interesting thing is, and I rolled a 15. So the 15 is a book written in an unknown language or a book containing things that you never wanted to know. I'm going to have to think on that. So I'm just going to copy that, put that in here as an interesting thing. And I'm going to have to give some thought to that because both of those options are pretty intriguing. Who knows what the book has if it's an unknown language? And if it is a known language, but it's things you never wanted to know, what kind of vile things are those? Cultist book, maybe? Anyway, that is my interesting thing and something I can use to enhance my character's role-playing experience. All right, speaking of role-playing, the character creation section goes on to role-playing and it talks about different aspects of role-playing. You can roll personality traits here. I don't really want to do that because I want my personality trait to come out naturally through my role-playing experience. And so I would rather do that than have the have to roll for it. But if you wanted to roll for it, then you can do that. I just find it difficult. Let's say if I rolled a humble yet lazy character, that's not the way I want to play. I don't want to play character that's lazy. So that's why I don't want to roll off this chart. I think it would make my role playing experience with this character less enjoyable. So I'm just going to forego that and let my character's personality just develop naturally. All right, your first adventure, learn the rules, decisions and outcomes, building a group, cooperation, level advancement. Those are all interesting things to talk about, but at this point, I am not going to go into any of that because I have my character and I'm ready to go. I'm going to let the DM tell me all about the group that I'm joining and what our opportunities are. So this is my character. I am ready to go. I have a 0-level dwarf named Brom Ironstone, who is has a background of being a pickpocket, but is now currently an evangelist for my religion. So my religion, if I want to default to what the normal dwarf religion is, would be the ancestors. Dwarven ancestors are the default dwarf religion. Now, I could say, hey, maybe I don't want to worship the dwarven ancestors. Maybe something happened that really made me hate that religion, and I would rather worship the old faith or the new god or maybe one of the dark gods. So that is something that I'll have to think about before the first game, and really kind of come down to determine what religion my character is really going to be evangelizing. All right, so that is it. I will go in later and do this character sheet a little bit more, a little more proper character sheet. So I'll take my club, I'll put it down here in the weapon. I'll take my information here and put it under the appropriate tabs, and the background I'll move over to that, and then I'll be really ready to rock and roll with this character. But anyway, that is how you roll up a character. See, that's my old mentality there. That is how you create a character for Shadow of the Demon Lord. I hope that was helpful, and I will use Brom Ironstone for my combat example for my next video whenever I get around to that. So hopefully it'll be in the next couple weeks, but we'll see. All right, so that is it. I'm going to end this video at this point, and I'm going to thank you all again for joining. I also, before I leave, actually, I'm going to mention that since I started this series, some other podcasts have come into being for Shadow of the Demon Lord. So I really don't feel as pressured to develop my own videos, since now there are other people doing a much better job than I am at this. But I think I'm going to continue doing this because this is kind of a fun exercise for me, and it helps me to reinforce my understanding of the rules as well, and the campaign world. And so I'm just going to keep doing this for shits and grins. And if you like it, great. You can tune in. If not, then go listen to those other podcasts because they're pretty cool. Go on to the G Plus community. You'll find links to those other podcasts there. All right. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye to y'all. And as usual, I'm going to leave you all with a hearty hail.